would like, if I may, to take you on a strange journey.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Real Estate Realities with the Rebel Broker. My name's Robert Whitelaw, and I am the Rebel Broker, licensed real estate broker in the state of California, also a member of the National Association of Realtors. But please, don't hold that against me. Appreciate you all taking the time out to listen to the show today. I have kind of an interesting reason why there was no show yesterday. I suppose I could share that with you. Before I get into that, though, let's go ahead and cover the basics. The best way to get in touch with me is through the website at therebelbroker.com. Once you're there, you can click on the contact link in the menu bar and send along any ideas, suggestions, or observations that you might have. While you're there, you can also click the big red button at the top of the site titled Take the Survey to Support the Show. You're not just going to be supporting the show, though, even though that should be reason enough. You'll also be entering yourself into a drawing for a $50 Amazon gift card. Now, it just so happens it is August 1st, so it's the beginning of the month. So within the next couple of weeks, we will be doing the drawing for this month's $50 Amazon gift card, and wouldn't it be oh so swell for your name to be in the hat when that drawing happens? Well, to get it in there, simply go to therebelbroker.com, click on the big red button at the top of the page titled Take the Survey to Support the Show, or if you're looking at the show notes for today's show, you can click on the link to support, that says Support the Show, that link there. Answer the questions about what your email address is. Make sure you use an email address that you get that you can get access to, because if you win, that's how I'm going to be contacting you and also sending you your $50 Amazon gift card. Then answer the 5 demographic style questions and you are done. You've helped the show, and you have also helped yourself by getting yourself in that drawing for that $50 Amazon gift card. And congratulations to the folks who've won the 550, 600, I don't know where we are in terms of how much we've given out, but congrats to the folks who've already won. Good luck to those of you who get your name in the hat, and I will give you a heads up when we get close to the time that I am going to be selecting the next winner. All right. So as many of you know, my oldest son turned 18 2 weeks and 2 days ago. And this last weekend was the first weekend after his 18th birthday that he was at my house. So I thought I would do something special. And here's where the idea kind of came from. We have all seen, if you're a student of history or you've seen any movies that take place relating to other times, it's been a tradition in an awful lot of communities over the years to have some sort of coming of age thing, right? Something that defines that moment when you go from being a boy to a man, right? If any of you are a fan of the movie 300, you know that there's 2 big challenges. There's you get born and they look at you to make sure you're nothing wrong with you. And if there is something wrong with you, they discard you. And the next big thing is they throw you out of the village and you're not allowed to come back until you've killed a bear or a wolf or whatever it is. Well, we don't do that anymore. If I were to throw my son into the wilds and tell him he can't come home until he has a bear skin slung over his shoulder, I would probably go to jail. So I tried to come up with a 21st century version of that. And as I did, it suddenly occurred to me how wimpy all the 21st century versions would be. However, I ended up settling on a hot wing challenge. For those of you who poke around on YouTube now and then, there's a show up there called... what the heck is it called? I can't remember. But it's a hot wing show. Hot Ones is what it's called. And it's an interview show where they eat hot wings, and it gets gradually hotter. So I went ahead and got my hands on 6 different hot sauces that on the Scoville scale started at around 2,000 on the Scoville scale, which is the equivalent of about sriracha, that went all the way up to 1.2 million on the Scoville scale, and there are even ones that go up to 2 million. I haven't heard of anything more than about 2,200,000 right in that ballpark. So I went ahead and prepared these things on Sunday, and as part of the challenge, you start with the least hot one, and you eat it, and then I would ask him a question, and he'd get to ask me a question. And the thing was, you had to answer honestly, right? So that was the whole process. And I videoed it so that I can give him a copy, and years down the road when he's 25 and 30, he can look back. And some of the questions were things I tried to come up with, really, appropriate questions like, what would you want to tell your 30-year-old self to always remember, or something that you really think is important now that you think your 30-year-old self should remember, those kinds of things, right? So videotaped that. It's going to store it away. I've backed it up to my computer, going to put it on a thumb drive for him. And that all sounds great, right? Well, I made the mistake of deciding I would participate with him side by side. Each of us would eat a wing from the same batch of hotness as we went. And by the time we got to the fifth hot wing, once we got to the fifth hot wing, it was clear that a horrible mistake had been made. The pain was unbelievable. But of course, I told him that if we didn't eat all the hot wings all the way up to number 6, that we would forever in the family call him Miss Connor Whitelaw, because he failed to get his man card by eating the hot wings. And of course, by default, if I failed, I would no longer be allowed to be called Mr. Whitelaw. So we went ahead and pushed through and went to the 1.2 million Scoville one, and I think pretty much the 357,000 Scoville one that we had just eaten had pretty much burned our nerve endings. So maybe that's why that 1.2 million one didn't seem quite so bad. And managed to survive, and everything was great. We had a great time. It was a fun time for us to hang out. But that wasn't the hard part. For my part, I would be willing to sit through that whole process of eating those things again. What I don't want to go through is the evening that follows it and the day that follows that. So late Sunday all the way till late Monday, I was a shell of my former self. It was not pleasant. If you are trying to come up with something equally cute to do with your oldest child as sort of a rite of passage, if you're not already a hot sauce person, let me suggest you don't use this as your opportunity to become one. Prior to this, I don't think I'd ever even bothered to buy anything more involved than sriracha, right? I like sriracha on just about everything. So I'd never even experienced the truly hot stuff. And man, was it a mind blower. So that was really, I spent Monday feeling horrible. And there you go. I don't know how interesting any of you will find that, but that was my Sunday evening and Monday. Now, in the wake of that, in reviewing articles out there, I found one that I thought must be related to my hot sauce consumption. The only way this news item could be true is if it's a fever dream, because it is so out of line with everything we've talked about that I found it very difficult to believe it was true. But not for the reasons you might think. This actually indicates a level of sanity that I thought was completely gone. And not only is it an element of sanity, it's an element of sanity from one of the organizations that I have always considered to be the least sane. Now, we're going to get into that. We're going to chat about that after the break. But before we do, I wanted to do a quick recap on sort of surveying the employment situation. Now, one thing we've always talked about on this show is healthy employment equals a healthy real estate business, or wealthy real estate market. If you have a job, a good paying job, that means you qualify to buy a house. That means you can afford to make the payments. It means you can, and if you feel very comfortable in your job, if you feel like you have a lot of security, you're going to be willing to go out there and buy a house. You'll be a better risk, so you'll be more likely to get that loan. If you don't have jobs, you don't have people capable of buying homes. That's the bottom line. And that has always been something I've kept my eyes on. And we've talked about it in a lot of different ways. We've talked about how real the unemployment numbers are, or what kinds of jobs have been created over the last 10 years since the downturn, and whether or not those were comparable to the jobs that we had before the downturn, and how a lot of them were in the service industry and tended to not be full-time. So there's a lot of qualifications where people were celebrating unemployment numbers going down, but the quality of the jobs that were being created wasn't on par with what we would hope for. And then, of course, we had that constantly growing number of non-participants, which I've never understood why we call it non-participants. You're not a non-participant. Even if you're not looking for a job, even if you've given up on looking for a job, you're still a participant. You're still out there doing things in the world. And if you're not making money, then you're having some sort of other impact economically on employment and the scene around you, right? So having this gigantic number of people who simply are not counted has never really made much sense to me. But the other angle we've come at this from is the amount of change that's going to happen in business over the next 5 to 10 years relating to automation. I watched a video recently about Amazon showing how they manage their warehouses, and people don't walk aisles and pick up if you order something from Amazon, the first thing that happens once that order goes in is robots go and find the display, the storage area where your thing is. And then that robot goes underneath that shelf, picks up the shelf, and carries it to a person who's going to pick it and put it into your box. And that's true of each individual item. One of these little weird forklift square things that just gets under a shelf and lifts itself straight up to carry it is what does that. So huge cuts in the number of people who need to work in those warehouses to do the work. Those people just don't walk around the warehouse. They stay where they are, and other people pick it. Another side effect with Amazon's efficiency and how they do things is its effect on businesses out in the retail world. And the reason why I even bring that up is because the small businesses, those are the ones that tend to really boost employment. It's not the giant companies. It's not the IBMs. It's not the Apples or the Googles that tend to be the folks that really make big dents into unemployment. It's all those individuals who decide, I'm going to start a company, and then they start going and they hire people, right? Well, unfortunately, for the first half of 2017, there is a surge by 110% of retail bankruptcies. And that's just nuts. That is a huge drop. That is a lot of people losing their jobs who previously worked at companies that went bankrupt. According to the rating agency, the trailing 12-month high-yield default rate among U.S. retailers rose to 2.9% in mid-July from 1.8% at the end of June after J.Crew completed a $566 million distressed debt exchange. Meanwhile, the shale sector flooded with Wall Street's easy money. The overall high-yield default rate tumbled to 1.9% in the same period from 2.2% at the end of June, as $4.7 billion of defaulted debt, mostly in the energy sector, rolled out of the default universe. So at least that's good news. In terms of Chapter 11 filings by sectors, utilities were at 4%, telecom 2%, technology 3%, other 2%, materials 4%, industrials 11%, healthcare 12%, financials 24%, energy 11%, consumer staples 4%, and consumer discretionary 23%. And if you take a look at sort of the plotting of this, it's really kind of nuts. So it's another one of those things that we can sort of add to our list of things to be at least aware of as we consider what's going on with employment and what's likely to happen with employment moving forward as we sort of move through the second half of 2017. Now, next, we're going to chat a little bit about Fannie and Freddie. One super smart thing, believe it or not, and one not so smart thing. So don't go away. Right after this, we'll be right back. Are you ready to jump in and start your search for your first investment property? Maybe you've decided that it's time to own your own home, or maybe you're ready to sell your home and move on to something new. No matter what your goal is, the Rebel Broker can help. That's right. Aside from hosting this show, I am also the owner-broker of Whitelaw & Sons Real Estate Services right here in Silicon Valley. With over 25 years experience serving Silicon Valley, Morgan Hill, San Martin, and Gilroy, I or one of my great agents can help you achieve your goals in real estate. So if you're ready to look into taking that next step towards achieving your real estate goals, point your browser at www.soldbyrobert.com. That's www.soldbyrobert.com and get in touch. Let me show you how I will earn your business and your respect. Again, that's www.soldbyrobert.com, or you can call me at 408-852-0525. California Bureau of Real Estate ID 00984-909. Welcome back, everyone. We've got a couple of interesting stories revolving around two of the GSEs, or government-sponsored entities. For those of you who've been paying attention in terms of what we talk about, the things that were major players in the downturn back in 2006, 2007, the stuff that Fannie and Freddie were up to were very much at the heart of the problem. They were right there on the forefront of securitizing so many of these subprime loans. And of course, the rules upon which they will purchase on the secondary market, right? So the way this market works, to sort of give you a summary, we've gone through this in some detail before. If you'd like to check out those shows, go to the website, therebelbroker.com, do a search on Fannie and Freddie. You'll see tons and tons of stuff that we've talked about over the many years relating to this topic. But Fannie and Freddie tend to be the place where banks dump their loans. They have certain rules. Banks have to underwrite loans, and they have to follow certain rules, fill in the correct boxes, get the right numbers, the ratio, and all the various things have to be right. So there's a checklist of things. And if the borrower meets all the items on that checklist, then that means that the bank can now sell to Fannie or Freddie, and they can sell it into the secondary market to Fannie and Freddie, which basically translates into the bank no longer takes the risk, right? Who is given the risk? Well, the government-sponsored entity is, and you're the one on the hook if the government-sponsored entity acts poorly or does things unwisely and ends up holding really bad loans. And back in the 90s, Fannie and Freddie were some of the main coordinators of putting together this idea of securitizing these loans so they could be traded on the stock market, they could be bought and sold, all that kind of stuff. And it was all that buying and selling that caused problems of figuring out who owned what. So I realize a lot of this is ancient history for a lot of you. Suffice to say that Fannie and Freddie and the other government-sponsored entities were, the architects of what made things get screwed up to a great degree. There were other things as well, but they were huge in their part they played in really pushing the subprime loan equation. And in addition to that, created a secondary market for mortgages that then made a bad situation worse. And then when it came time for them to deal with all of the foreclosed properties that they now held, instead of simply doing it in a way that would allow you and other individuals out in the real world to purchase a single home, they bundled them into groups to the point where only big, gigantic companies could buy them, because we were talking millions and millions of dollars. You had to buy homes in blocks. They weren't going to sell them one at a time. So all the way through the whole process, the government-sponsored entities were doing stupid things that clearly didn't work in the best interests of them. If they had sold those properties individually and left it open to everyone eBay style, they would have walked away with way more money. If I was their real estate agent, right? Let's say they said, I have just been given ownership of 723,000 homes, and I need to sell them. So should I, by region, just group them into dozens of homes at a time and sell them in a batch, or should I sell them individually? I sure as heck wouldn't have suggested they put them into a batch, simply because that is going to equal less paid per house. If they had simply done the online style thing where all the person had to do was just pay online, right? And that was one thing. They didn't want you couldn't come in and get a loan through them. You had to just buy it. You had to pay money. But if you went and let the bidding do it and let people bid for these properties, I'm convinced they would have ultimately ended up with more money being returned into the government-sponsored entity, which in turn would defray the costs already incurred that you, the taxpayer, were paying, right? So a whole long list of really stupid things. Now, we talked last month. I was getting you ready for the idea that in July, the debt-to-income ratio was going to be changed. And what that means is that now underwriters, when they're underwriting, can let your debt to income ratio be higher and still qualify to get purchased by Fannie and Freddie, by Fannie specifically in that secondary market, so that the banks don't have to hold on to the risk of a home loan. They underwrite it, they do their thing, and then they sell it off to Fannie, and they're done. They can wash their hands of it. So if that person stops making payments, the person on the hook is no longer the bank that originated the loan, unless they committed fraud in underwriting the loan or did something inappropriate when they underwrote the loan. That's the only way it can come back and bite them. You, the taxpayer, on the hook, right? So what we talked about was that it was going to be changed from the debt to income ratio being previously had been at 45%. And now they were going to allow it to go up to 50% debt to income ratio. So now all those folks can apply for those loans. And the interesting is that this article gives us a bit of a rundown on how many new home buyers that's likely to be. Now, what's interesting here is the Urban Institute pointed out one change that could allow nearly 100,000 new home buyers to qualify for a mortgage each year. Fannie Mae announced it was raising its debt to income ratio to further expand mortgage lending. Now, when someone says expand mortgage lending, nobody is talking about extending it to qualified people. By definition, when you talk about expanding mortgage lending, you're reaching down. You are reaching to the people who are less qualified than the people you are currently allowing to borrow. You don't expand mortgage lending upward because those people are already qualified, right? It's like the height limit for that ride at Disneyland. If you're already taller than the little hand, you get to ride already, right? And I don't have a problem with that as long as we understand that the things that are being done are things that still generate a reliable and low-risk loan. And that is exactly what this doesn't do. This changing of what the government-sponsored entities raising the limit from 45% debt to income ratio to 50% debt to income ratio simply doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense even if you don't even want to talk about doing math or any of those other kind of wonderful things. If you just want to look back historically at this number, bad things have happened when it was a 45. So I don't get this belief that somehow by being more leveraged in debt as it relates to your income, that's a good thing. It says here that flexibility was almost always offered to mortgages with loan-to-value ratios lower than 80%. This new increase is significant as increasingly 3% down payments are becoming the new normal even on conventional loans. So we're already at a point where very low down payments are the commonplace occurrence, and that does tend to be very true. And remember, we also talked about 0% loans, 1% loans, 2% loans that have been going around. And we're going to talk about those in a second. The Urban Institute estimated that 95,000 new loans will be approved each year due to Fannie Mae's DTI increase. It's stated in a report written by Edward Golding, Lori Goodman, and June Su. The report also explained a disproportionate share of the new loans will go toward Black and Latino families, as they are 1.5 times more likely to have DTI ratios above 45%. Now, as far as the racial element here, I couldn't care less. If I don't care what color you are, if your credit score or credit rating or credit history indicates that you're a responsible borrower and that when you borrow money, you pay it back. The reality here isn't don't feel good about the color of the person who's getting the money or feel bad about it. Feel bad or good about how qualified the borrower is. That's what matters here. And the thing that bothers me most about this mentality is that people jump to this, well, it's so good that we're helping unfortunate people or people who historically have been less fortunate when it comes to getting loans. It's so wonderful we're helping them get money. You're not helping them get money. You are helping them get debt. That's not helping someone. And not only are you helping them get debt, because we are by definition reaching into levels of financial responsibility that are lower than what they were before. We are reaching out to folks who are more than likely, because of this, right? It raises the risk level of the loans that get underwritten. simply because you have lowered the standard of what we expect. You've reached down into a lifestyle where now this person has a 50% debt to income ratio potentially, which is far less manageable when things get tighter. And remember what we've talked about here in terms of the debt profile of the average American and how much challenge there is there. And if we start to see crumbling in that area, if we start to see challenges, you'll see people making the same choices they made last time, which led to our downturn, right? The things they choose to stop paying. So I think this is a big deal. I think that it's a scary thing. I don't think it's a wise thing. What I would rather see is them continue to leave lending standards tight and invest time in teaching people how to be financially responsible. And then instead, they're doing it backwards. In a lot of cases, for some of these loans, for instance, we were talking about the 1% and 2% loans. There were other organizations offering them, but they were all eligible to be sold on the secondary market. So in other words, you could do these crazy 1% loans, even 0% loans, but the bank who was underwriting them wasn't holding on to it. They were going to continue and sell it off to the GSEs. So suddenly you assume the risk of that loan. Now, some of those were saying if they agree to take responsible borrowing classes or responsible financial classes after the loan, then they're good to go. They can take those classes after they get the loan. That's the wrong order. For me, I say let's have these people get the classes they need to learn what they need to know to be responsible borrowers and be good at it. And then let's leave the standards where they are and let them put what they have learned into practice, which will improve their credit score, right? It seems like the way to go. Maybe I'm being too heartless. I don't know. But I'll tell you what I think is heartless. Saddling someone with debt that they don't have the financial maturity to manage when things get tough and to make those good choices that help them be responsible borrowers. There's nothing sadder than sitting across a dining room table from two young people who had no business getting that $600,000 loan based on what they knew and based on their incomes. And now the downturn has happened and their home is worth less than they owe and they are screwed. That sucks. And we shouldn't allow it to happen again. But that's just one part, right? We're about to increase the number of potential buyers by 100,000. What does that do to the market? It doesn't help it. We already have too little inventory right now. We're not in a position for this to be a good thing. This will make things worse. Prices will go up. So suddenly in the pool of buyers, you'll have an extra 100,000 folks who are going to have to borrow even more money because now they're competing with a new, larger group of folks who have already proven, because their credit rating was lower before, are less capable of managing their finances. So I don't agree with this idea that we're helping anybody. Well, at least not helping them into a thing I would wish on anyone. Crippling debt, higher potential of financial failure, a broader chance that you're going to end up in a foreclosure situation. None of those things sound good to me. So it would seem like that would be something we'd want to avoid. All right. Now, here's the other side of that government-sponsored entity coin. We just talked about Fannie Mae. Here's a headline for Freddie Mac. And it verifies a few things I said before, but it also then undoes it. For those of you who aren't aware, as I just mentioned a moment ago, we were talking about 1% loans, 2% loans, 0% loans, all these crazy loans that were being underwritten where the bank that was doing the lending was pitching in so that the out-of-pocket for the buyer was only 1%. It was still officially a 3% down loan. But the lending bank was coming up with a 2%. And you can bet that wasn't out of the goodness of their heart. I'm sure if you sat down and looked at the paperwork, there was an additional 2% tacked onto the purchase price as an origination fee. It was being rolled into the overall purchase price. So if you were paying $100,000, that one fee would be an extra $2,000, right? So that's how they were doing it. There's no question in my mind that's how they were doing it. But clearly, they were in partnership with Freddie Mac. Because as we'll see here in a minute, while Freddie Mac has now changed their stance on it, clearly the way it was before was Freddie would purchase these loans in the secondary market. Tons of them have been written, tons of them have been done, so there's a whole bunch of them out there. But Freddie Mac has just killed the 1% down payment mortgage. And I'm stunned at how it's a sane and rational decision. And I'm trying to look at the other hand to figure out, because I can't imagine they did it for a sane and reasonable reason. Unless it is finally becoming very clear to folks at Freddie that we are heading into some potentially risky territory and that we need to stop doing this. If that's the case, awesome. Not really getting that sense, but we can look a little bit more deeply into this and see what's going on. So Freddie Mac announced last week that it's changing the requirements to its low-down mortgage program. It will no longer allow lenders to contribute gifts or grants to reach the 3% down payment requirement. Under the new guideline for home possible mortgages, borrowers must front at least 3% down in order to receive any type of contribution from a lender. So in other words, if you're really doing a 5% down loan, and a bank is contributing 2%, you need to come up with the other 3%. You always need to be at least 3% in. Now, before you take a deep breath and go, whew, wow, sanity in the lending market. What a wonderful thing. Realize that 3% is almost nothing. Now, granted, it is some skin in the game, and it's better than nothing. It's better than 0%. It's better than 1%. But just remember that the day that escrow closes on that house, on that person who has put down 3%, they owe more than the house is worth. Right? Because we all know this isn't just two parties, a buyer and a seller involved, right? We also understand that there are real estate agents who get paid. We understand that there are loan originators on the buyer's side that get paid. We understand that there are taxes that get paid, right? Fees, escrow numbers, insurance stuff. There's all kinds of things that get paid in a transaction, and it is more than 3% of the purchase price once you add it all up. Right? Hell, the real estate agent alone likely costs the seller 6%. Right? Maybe 5% if they've negotiated a lower rate. Now, this includes borrowers under the Home Possible Advantage program, which is Freddie Mac's affordable conforming conventional mortgage that allows a 3% down payment to help more first-time home buyers and other qualified borrowers jump into the market. According to the guide, Freddie Mac is revising its requirements to state that, quote, gifts or grants from the seller as the originating lender will be permitted only after a contribution of at least 3% of value is made from borrower personal funds and or other eligible sources of funds as described in the guide. So here's another thing that's going to be important. You as a buyer or you as an agent, I know I have quite a few agents out there. I looked into this a little bit, and from the way I read it, this means that, let's say you are the buyer, you're representing the buyer, you're only putting down 3%. If you're going to get a credit for something, whatever it is, you do a home inspection and you discover that the water heater is nearing its end of life, or whatever. You find something you don't the way the deck isn't quite right. Whatever. If the seller is going to credit to the buyer any amount of money and the only funds that the buyer is putting in is 3%, that's probably going to get rejected by your lender. And the reason I mention this is it probably won't get rejected until they get that final balance sheet just before close of escrow. The escrow company is going to send that sheet to the lender, and the next thing that's supposed to happen is they're supposed to issue the wire transfer so that the home can be purchased. But remember, there's a bean counter that's going to check this stuff over, and they're going to see that suddenly you're only putting down 2.9% or 2.865 or whatever the hell it is, and they're going to kick it back. And they're going to tell you you can't do that. You have to be in by that amount of money. So what I'm going to do is suggest that for those of you who are doing this, instead of crediting the buyer, I'm going to suggest that you adjust the purchase price. I think that's a safer way to go. That's the way I do it, just to keep it cleaner. because and I think this will cause confusion at the front end because it is ridiculously common, capital R, ridiculously common for this scenario to play out this way, where the buyer makes an offer, everything starts going. At some point, it's discovered something isn't the way the buyer thought, or an inspection reveals something or whatever, and the escrow can still close without that item being fixed, but now the buyer wants a credit for something. Don't issue a credit. You don't want to do that. You're going to want to actually just change the agreed upon purchase price of the home by that amount of money. Unless they are for some reason putting down more cash, or if your buyer's cool with it and says, yeah, you know what, I'm willing to increase my down payment to cover that amount. That's fine too. But just be aware of it. The time for you to figure this out isn't when the bank says, sorry, we can't send the money because now we see your buyer isn't putting down a full 3%, right? So just be careful, please. Freddie Mac is changing that. Okay, we already talked about that. It added that gifts or grants from the seller must not be funded through the mortgage transaction, right? Including differential pricing in rate, discount points, or fees for individual loans or across the home possible offering, which means that lenders are no longer allowed to roll the 2% gift back into the loan. The new updates will go into effect for mortgages with settlement dates on or after November 1st, 2017. So this change does have a little ways to go. If you've got a transaction going on right now where you're putting down 1% and your lender is kicking in 2%, you're fine as long as your escrow closes before November 1st. Keep that number in your head. If you're someone taking advantage of this idiotically low down payment of 1% or 0% or 2%, ingrain in your mind November 1st. Remember, you must close by October 31st. Don't even go there. Just make sure you close before the first day of November. Fannie and Freddie started the low down payment trend back in 2014 when both of the government-sponsored enterprises rolled out 3% down mortgages. Some of the nation's biggest mortgage lenders signed up to take part in those programs, including Bank of America, Wells Fargo, and JP Morgan Chase. But other lenders took it a step further by beginning to offer mortgages with as little as a 1% down payment required from the borrower. And we covered all of them. The first one we covered was Quicken Loans, who came out with a product in 2015, and we freaked out about it here as a really bad move. They have underwritten tons of these 1% down loan mortgages. Guaranteed Rate came out in 2016 with theirs. They have a 1% down. They also have a 2% down. And that's been going on. I'm not sure about the numbers of folks who've underwritten with them. And then there's Fifth Third Mortgage, went beyond Quicken and Guaranteed and rolled out a 0% down mortgage program just last year. So that one's going to get stopped, at least when it's relatively young, and who knows how many people have gone through it, but that's another one we talked about. And at the time, it just blew us away. One other thing that's still going on, there is no end in sight to the 120% loan. For those of you who didn't catch that show, let me suggest you just go to the website, therebelbroker.com, do a quick search on just do 120%, and I'm sure that'll pop up. But that is basically a loan where you're rolling your student loan into a home loan, and you can borrow up to 120% value of the property that the mortgage is based on. So that's absolutely moronic. It doesn't matter where that debt comes from. It doesn't matter if it's a student loan or anything else. Frankly, it will become the stuff that's associated with your house. And with folks being that far underwater on a loan on their house, it's not going to take much for folks to realize I should just blow this off. This shouldn't be something that I saddle myself with. But anyway, at least we'll see some sanity in terms of some of these trimmings that are happening with the 3% down loan. I think that's a smart move, but frankly, it's a drop of water in the ocean in terms of everything else that's going on. All right. I truly appreciate all of you taking time out of your day to spend with me. I do truly realize how valuable your time is, and my hope with each and every show is that I am giving you more value in terms of what you're able to think about or consider after the show than what you invested in terms of time. I hope we've achieved that today. Thanks again for listening, everybody. I'll talk to y'all next time.